I'm so happy to be here to tell you about my father's life of defiance and resistance during the Holocaust. Hermann Wygoda was a 33-year-old civil engineer living in Warsaw the day the Germans invaded Poland. He survived by assuming a false identity, first in Poland, then in Germany, and finally in Italy, where he was an armed resistance fighter until the end of the war. But his resistance didn't end then because early on he realized the importance of bearing witness to future generations. So in 1945, before he left Europe to come to the US, he wrote his memoir of the Holocaust. And this is a photo of a part of his memoir. It's all written in Polish. I can't read any Polish myself, but I can make out one word. Let's see if this pointer will work. Right there, Treblinka. Okay, as many of you know, this was one of the 6 death camps that the Nazis had built in Poland with the express purpose of annihilating Jews. A great many of my relatives perished in Treblinka. Well, my father came to the United States in 1946, settled in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and started a new family. I'm part of that family. He passed away in 1982. But in the 1960s, about 20 years after he came to the United States, when he got here, he couldn't speak any English at all. But 20 years later, about 1965, 66, he translated his memoir into English himself. And the memoir has been published in the form of a book. This is the book. It's titled In the Shadow of the Swastika. That's my father on the cover. As you can see, he is the author. I'm down as the editor because I edited his English language manuscript for publication. And the foreword was written by a noted Holocaust historian, Dr. Michael Berenbaum. This was published many years after he died. A few years after this book was published, an Italian language version was published. There's a historical research society in Savona, Italy. Savona was the province where my father was active as a partisan. They translated the book into Italian and they published it not for sale, but to give away to schools throughout the province of Savona so that their future generations would know who Hermann Wygoda was. Now let's start with his life. There's my father. He was born in Offenbach, Germany in 1906 to Polish parents. The lady holding his hand was his mother, Hanna. His father's name was Meyer. So his parents were Hanna and Meyer Wygoda. That's how the name was pronounced in Poland, Wygoda. The other lady in this picture was one of her sisters. Her name was Golda. Now, Hanna came from a huge family. She had 4 brothers and 5 sisters. 2 of her sisters had immigrated to the United States before the Holocaust. They both survived, and I got to meet them when I was a little boy. One of her brothers had died before the Holocaust, but all the rest of them were murdered during the Holocaust. Don't know much about his father, Meyer, other than the fact that he was killed in World War I. Now, after Meyer was killed, Hanna took Herman and his little brother, Leon, back to her hometown of Kossow, Poland, a little tiny town located about 50 miles northeast of Warsaw, the big capital. This is a picture of Leon with Hanna taken, I think, in the 1930s. Leon remained in Kossow, became a cabinet maker. He married, and the couple had 2 daughters. But my father, he spent a few years in the Polish army as an officer, a lieutenant. And he also attended Warsaw Polytechnic Institute and became an engineer. He took his first job back in Germany, in Berlin. But he left to go back to Poland in 1929 because of the rising anti-Semitism that was happening in Germany. There he married, and the couple had a son, Samuel. It's a picture of Samuel. Samuel would have been my half brother. We shared the same father. He was born in 1934. But the couple later separated, and my father raised Samuel himself with the help of his mother. The three of them lived in a downtown Warsaw apartment. Now, in the summer of 1939, my father knew war was coming. And he also knew that when the Germans took over Poland, the Jews there would suffer the same terrible fate that Jews had been suffering in Germany ever since Hitler came to power in 1933. He knew what was happening in Germany because he would listen to international news on his shortwave radio. So he felt it would be far safer for his son and mother to be with his brother Leon back in that little town of Kossow rather than in the capital of Warsaw, which he knew would be attacked. So he took them to Kossow and returned to Warsaw where he worked. Well, the Germans attacked on September 1st, 1939. My father survived the bombardment of Warsaw. He survived the artillery barrage that followed. And after the city surrendered, he watched the first German troops arrive in Warsaw by train to take place in their victory parade that they put on for Adolf Hitler in early October. He said almost immediately the Germans started issuing anti-Jewish laws, these laws that had taken 6 years to fully implement in Germany. They were put in place in Poland in a matter of weeks. In his memoir, he talks about the very first law, and that was requiring all Jews to turn in their radios to the nearest police station. And he said he saw out in the street men, women, and children carrying radios of different vintages, he called them. He decided to hold on to his shortwave radio for the time being. Well, he could no longer work because he took on a false identity. He posed as a Catholic Pole. Where he worked, they knew he was Jewish, right? So he had a new job. He posed not just as a ordinary Catholic Pole, but instead as a Volksdeutscher. The Volksdorsch, German term, literally meaning German folk. As the definition says, these were ethnic Germans, Germans who had, people who had German ancestry. They weren't Germans, but they had ancestors, not Jewish, of course, but ancestors who were German. They lived in other countries. They didn't live in Germany. So they weren't German citizens, but they were held in relatively high regard by the Germans. They were the closest thing to a German citizen. He got away with it. And he credits his success to his language skills. He could speak German and Polish fluently. He'd been raised in both countries. And even in the summers when he was a little boy, his mother would take him back to Kossow, to her family's place, and spend the summer there. So he knew both languages. He said he could speak German with the accent of someone from Berlin when he needed to. Other times, he spoke Polish. But like I said, he could no longer work at his job, so he took on another occupation. He became a smuggler. He had two partners in his smuggling operation. One was a furrier, and another one was a jeweler. They're both in Warsaw. And he would take goods from them. He'd smuggle them out of Warsaw into the countryside, where he'd sell them and use the money to purchase food to provide for his family back in Kossow, and also provide for his friends in Warsaw. He said his friends desperately needed his help. His friends included the wife of a good friend of his who had been killed in the very beginning of the war, and their daughter. This is a picture of their daughter. Don't know what her name was, but my father mentions in his memoir that she was the same age as his son. Now, little daughter and her mother and his two business partners, they all lived in what was the old Jewish section of downtown Warsaw. And that is the part of Warsaw that was turned into the Warsaw Ghetto. Now, I'd like you to focus on the wall that surrounds the ghetto, that wall in this picture. My father said that in the spring of 1940, there were rumors going around that the Germans were going to separate the Jews of Warsaw from the rest of the population. And also there were sections of walls that are being constructed in different parts of the downtown. And he was curious, so he went exploring and he found 10-foot high wall sections. It's different parts of downtown. He couldn't make any sense of it. So he stopped at one of the construction sites and asked the brick mason, what are these walls for? And the man said he didn't know. Well, in the summer of 1940, he said those walls were going up at a much faster pace. He wrote in his memoir, what in the spring had appeared to be a crossword puzzle with scattered pieces now began to look like a medieval fortress. But no medieval fortress had ever covered so much territory. In some places, the walls ran down the centers of streets. In other places, whole rows of apartment buildings had their gates blocked up with bricks. Well, he continued his smuggling operation even after the ghetto was completely sealed off from the rest of the world, and that happened in November 1940. He never really said in his memoir exactly how he would get in and get out of that place, only that he used what he called holes in the wall that were reserved for professional smugglers only. But he did talk about, in his memoir, he did write about what he saw in the fall of 1941, the dead and the dying lying out on the sidewalks. Every time he left, he wondered whether he would have the courage to go back in there because of all this misery that he was witnessing. But he kept going back. He said the ghetto pulled him in like a magnet. Even after that little girl and her mother both died in the spring of 1942, he kept going back, but now he was delivering food to starving children that were lying out on the sidewalks. He said they looked like miniature skeletons with glassy eyes set deep in bony sockets with an expression of hopeful expectation. Now, here's a map that my father drew when he was translating his memoir into English in the 1960s. Warsaw is down here in the lower left, and these lines, straight lines, are railroad tracks linking together various cities and towns that he talked about in his memoir. Kossaw, where his family was now located, was right here. He drew in what represented a railroad spur leading to Treblinka. This was deep in the woods, about a mile off the main track, 7 miles from Kossaw. Now, at this time, his family was in the Kossaw ghetto. And what my father would do he would smuggle the goods out of Warsaw, now about once a month instead of twice a month like he used to, sell them in the countryside, take food to his family in Kossaw, and stay with them for about 2 weeks in that ghetto, and then return to Warsaw with food for his friends, and food for the little children, rather. But one day in the spring of 1942, when he was in Kossaw, he was arrested by the Polish police. He had had a run-in with them. They arrested him, they beat him up, they threw him in jail, and after several days, they took him to this town by railroad train about 10 miles away, Sokolow, actual city, a big city. Put him in the Jewish ghetto there, told him to stay. Well, he was not about to stay. He couldn't go to Kossaw anymore because if he was spotted there by the Polish police, they would kill him and probably kill his family too. So he took this route to get back to Warsaw to and from for his smuggling operation. And he used the Sokolov ghetto as his base of operations. Well, his return to Warsaw one day in July 1942 turned out not to be usual at all. When he got there, a friend of his, this man, his name was Stanislaw Gorczyca. Stanislaw was a real Catholic Pole, not a phony one like my father. He was also a postal worker. Stanislaw warned him that if he was going to go into the ghetto again this time, he needed to be very cautious. He told him that strange things were happening at the railroad station closest to the ghetto. The Germans appeared to be assembling all available freight cars there. And strangely enough, they were boarding up the air vents on those cars with heavy boards and barbed wire. And nobody knew what was going on, except, of course, the Germans. Well, nevertheless, my father went in again. He said, this time the situation was very different. He said there was a lot more tension in the air. And whenever a German patrol was spotted, everyone ran for cover. He along with them, he asked the people, what's going on here? And they told him that lately those German patrols had been shooting into the crowds indiscriminately. Then he saw in the distance what looked like a large group of Jewish men and women being led in the direction of the railroad station by Germans, and everybody ran. He barely made it into an apartment building before the door was slammed shut behind him. And there in that crowded lobby, every once in a while he would make his way to the front door to look through one of the peepholes. And he said what he saw outside was a column of Jewish men and women, he estimated 18 to 20 people wide, being led in the direction of the railroad station by German soldiers with bayonets fixed to their rifles. He said it took about 40 minutes for this whole procession to pass by. He then went back out into the street, started doubting the wisdom of him being there, but nevertheless, he went on to the sidewalk where he would go take the potatoes and other food items to the children, only to be caught up in another crowd of people running like mad. This time he witnessed the murder of a young Jewish man out on the sidewalk by a Nazi SS officer who shot him in the back of the head. Well, that convinced him it was just far too dangerous for him to be in there. He left, never to go back inside. But he did not return to the Sokolov ghetto. Instead, he went to Stanislaw's house in Warsaw. And Stanislaw told his wife that my father was a distant cousin and needed a place to stay. So he was allowed to stay there, and it looked like everything was working out. He began wondering if it would be possible to get his son Samuel there also to stay in that house. Talked to Stanislaw about it, and Stanislaw agreed not just to let Samuel come there, but to help my father get Samuel out of that ghetto and bring him to Warsaw. So one night, the two men boarded a passenger train bound for Warsaw. There's that map again. They were now on a train heading in this direction. My father was in disguise. You know, he couldn't afford to be seen in Warsaw by the police. He had grown a beard, and he was wearing Stanislaw's postal uniform as a disguise. When they got to Malkinia, they had to change trains to go to Warsaw, and they found out that the trains were not running. So they started walking along the tracks. They crossed that little bridge across the river, and very soon they found out why the trains were not running. They saw several freight trains stalled on the tracks, waiting their chance to make this turn to go into Treblinka. So they got on a road about 30 feet away and walked along. Inside, my father heard, inside those train cars, my father heard people. He heard children crying. He heard adults praying, others begging for water. He said there was different languages he heard, and he said he understood them all. As he and Stanislaw walked along in silence, they were crying as they walked along, listening to what they heard. Well, they made it to Kossow, got Samuel out of the ghetto, took him back to Warsaw into Stanislaw's house, but it didn't work out. Neighbors were getting suspicious and asking questions about the boy. So my father knew that the penalty in Poland for being caught hiding a Jew was death to the entire family. And he didn't want to risk Stanislaw and his family's lives. So he left with Samuel, but he didn't take Samuel back into the Kossow ghetto. Instead, he took him out into the countryside to a farm where he had a farmer friend, a man named Mr. Zielinski, and left him in the care of Mr. Zielinski. Started making his way back to Warsaw, but on his return to Warsaw, he was shot and wounded. He made it to Warsaw. He almost died, but they were able to find a Jewish doctor who saved his life. Now, while he was in Warsaw recuperating, his whole family, including Samuel, were taken to Treblinka and killed. And his inability to have saved them, that haunted him for the rest of his life. Well, sometime after that, he found himself working at a German military camp in this town over here, Terespol, alongside another Jewish man who was hiding in plain sight, just like he was. And here is that man. His name was Leon Pedagal, same first name as his brother, but different Leon Pedagal. And together, the two men made a really good team to help assure their mutual survival. Leon's talents came because before the war, he was a photographic laboratory technician, a photographer, and an artist. And with his skills, he could doctor stolen ID cards beyond detection. This is an actual ID card that Leon carried in 1943, and that's Leon's picture on it. Look how evil he looks. Of course, that was done on purpose. Who would suspect that was a Jew? He produced ID cards for my father as well. My father's contribution came not just from his language skills, but his bold nature combined with those language skills. And I'm going to give you an example of how his talent saved their lives. Someone in that military camp became suspicious of them and reported them to the Gestapo. Well, a friend of theirs found out that was happening and warned them, and they left. They got on a passenger train bound for Warsaw. But along the way, my father got word that the Germans were taking people off the trains at a little station in a town called Lukow. And he knew what was happening. This was now the spring of 1943. Germans were facing a labor shortage back at their war factories in Germany. And, they were not importing Jews into Germany for any reason whatsoever. So to make up their labor quota, they resorted to making slave raids into Poland and taking away ordinary Polish citizens, the majority of which were Catholic, into slavery. And that's what was happening at that railroad station. So at the last stop before Lukow, my father got out of their car, and with Leon, they stood on the platform looking around, and he saw in the middle of the train they were riding on, there were two cars reserved exclusively for German citizens. With no hesitation, he walked into one of those cars with Leon right behind him. Inside, there were 4 Germans, 2 civilians, 2 military men. He greeted them all with a Nazi salute. And then he and Leon sat down, made themselves comfortable. At times like this, Leon would hold his hand against the side of his face, pretending he had a toothache so he didn't have to talk. Leon didn't know much German, and he didn't have a German accent at all. My father immediately started talking to the Germans and kept up the conversation for a long time. And as the train pulled into the station at Lukow, He says he and the Germans were engaged in what he called a loud and lively conversation. This is the station at Leucott. It still exists today. The train they were on was now stopped on those tracks. German soldiers lined both sides, allowing no place to escape. As soon as the train stopped, a loudspeaker came on, issuing orders, first in German and then in Polish. The message in Polish was, everyone off the train, take your belongings with you, leave the doors to your compartments wide open, report to the main waiting room in the station. Failure to obey, you'll be shot to death. But the message in German that had preceded that was very different. In German, the passengers were told, stay in your cars, lock your doors, don't let anyone in. We'll be leaving shortly. So as those poor Polish folks were leaving the train, my father and Leon just sat there with the Germans, and the train took off after that for Warsaw. Well, next, the two men went to what might be the last place you'd expect Jews to go to seek refuge in Nazi-occupied Europe. And of course, that would be Berlin. Why Berlin? I just said, no one would expect Jews to go there, so they went. Referring to this bold move of theirs in the foreword to my father's book, Dr. Michael Berenbaum stated, safety is often found in the eye of the storm. So that's where they went. There they worked for a labor company owned by two German businessmen, both of whom were members of the Nazi Party. My father mentions they wore a lapel pin with a swastika on their coats. They liked my father. They really liked my father. He worked for them in various roles. At times, he was a translator, at times a foreman, and at times an armed courier. Leon worked for them as a draftsman. Now, in his role as courier, they once sent him to a mining camp in far northern Finland. And on that particular trip, he took with him a teenage Jewish boy that he and Leon had discovered among a group of new company recruits. And with fake documents filled out by Leon, that boy now found himself working in a place of relative safety. In his role as translator, he was assigned to a mining camp under construction in Estonia, near the town of Jovi, but deep in the woods. After about a week, he contacted his bosses and asked if they would send Leon. He claimed Leon was his cousin and liked to have him around. And like I said, his bosses liked him. They sent Leon, so they were both there now. Now, at first, they thought about maybe they should try to escape to the Russian front. Can you imagine that? But they gave up on that idea after some other people did try that, were caught by local hunters, returned to the camp, and hanged to death. Well, after about 6 weeks, my father asked for and received permission to take a leave of absence for a few days. In his memoir, he said that he wanted to go back to Warsaw to see his friends and also to see if he could help get anyone out of what he called that terrible place. Well, his arrival in Warsaw corresponded with the final week of the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt. And the day he arrived, which was May 12th, 1943, that's the day the Germans set fire to the ghetto to drive out their remaining resistors. This picture was taken that day. He watched for 4 days what he called that desperate but unequal fight through a window in a friend's apartment, a man named Frank, who lived right across the street from the ghetto. Then, with the help of Frank and his other friend Stanislaw and the Polish underground, he got hold of 2 teenage Jewish boys with false documents supplied by the underground, took them back to that mining camp with him in Jovi. Soon after that, the 2 men were reassigned to the company home office back in Berlin. And there, my father was constantly reminded of the dangerous situation they were in, because the company's office And that it was in a downtown Berlin office building. One floor above was a Gestapo unit. And almost every day he would pass the Gestapo agents going up and down the stairwells. He was terribly frightened, but he never showed a trace of fear. That would have given him away. He and Leon figured they needed to get out of Germany as soon as they could. They knew they were going to be discovered sooner or later. Well, their ticket out of Germany, so to speak, came thanks to the Allies who were now bombing Berlin. After one air raid, the company they worked for was given a contract to clear out the rubble of a bombed out government building that had not been hit with incendiary bombs, that did not catch on fire. He was put in charge of the job. They gave him 100 men, but he went in first to snoop around, and he found exactly what he was hoping to find: blank travel documents, blank ID cards, and the official government stamps. So he grabbed those things. Now, with these documents filled out properly by Leon, two men could go anywhere they wanted within the sphere of German influence. So in December of 1943, they boarded a passenger train and arrived at the Mediterranean port city of Savona, Italy. Now, this was after the Italians had overthrown their own dictator, Mussolini. Hitler had put Mussolini back in power, and the German troops had come down and occupied northern Italy. That's as far as they could get. This is a contemporary picture of Savona, Italy. There they worked for a construction company. My father spent every moment of the time he could learning Italian, and he learned it pretty quickly. They felt relatively safe, but my father wanted what he called complete freedom. And even though Leon tried to talk him out of it, he planned his escape to the island of Corsica out in the Mediterranean. Corsica was already occupied by the Americans. He bought a motorboat. He hired 2 ex-Italian Navy men to navigate. He also acquired weapons on the black market. He said he was not going to be taken alive. But in the early morning hours of February 12th, 1944, he was arrested in his hotel room by the German secret field police. This was the military equivalent of the Gestapo. 5 men, a captain, a sergeant, 3 enlisted men made the actual arrest, while other soldiers stood guard outside. They put him in the back of a German staff car, drove him to the military garrison in Savona, questioned him for hours, and locked him in a cell. He escaped that night. And he went up into the mountains to the west of Savona, over here. After a day or two, he found out from local farmers the reason the Germans had used such elaborate precaution in arresting him, the reason they had treated him with courtesy, the reason they just hadn't taken him out in the street and shot him, and that's because they thought they had captured a famous British spy that was supposed to be around. Of course, they got that wrong. But he also learned that Leon, too, had been arrested. Well, he spent the next several weeks living in a cave on the side of a mountain ridge. The location of the cave is shown by this arrow. It was very inaccessible. And it was there in that cave that he was approached by a group of armed men. He knew who they were. They were the partisans. They asked him to come with them. Of course, he went with them. They took him a few miles away to a house where he met a high-ranking officer in the Italian partisan army. Now, the name of that army, translated into English, was Voluntary Liberation Corps. That's what they called themselves. And after a long discussion, he was astonished when they not only invited him to join the partisans, but asked him to assume command of one of their units that was active in the area but had recently lost their leader. They made him understand that in this detachment, there were several soldiers, all vying for position to become the new commander. Factions were forming within the detachment, and they figured the best way to maintain peace and harmony in this group was to bring in a total outsider to be commander. And my father, with his prior military experience as an officer in the Polish army and his recently demonstrated prowess by having escaped from the German military jail, he was the one. So he agreed. And thereafter, he became known only as Comandante Enrico, Commander Enrico. All the partisans went with an assumed name. They all chose an alias. He chose Enrico for himself. And here is a picture in the center of my father, Hermann Wygoda, Comandante Enrico. In the background there, that was the mountain cave that he had been hiding in. He turned that into his command headquarters. Right? He was put in charge of a detachment of 117 volunteer freedom fighters. The mission of that detachment in the resistance army was to aggressively attack enemy convoys and troops that were passing through the mountains, but they were not that effective. My father's first act as commander was to reorganize the unit and instill discipline in his troops. And under his planning and leadership, they started becoming successful. In the beginning, they'd been fighting only with single-shot rifles, but soon they were using captured German automatic weapons, and later British weapons that were airdropped to them by the Allies. In this picture, my father is seen holding a British-made submachine gun. As they became more successful, the fame in the region grew, and more local Italians joined. My father split up his growing detachment into several different detachments, and then later grouped various detachments into 4 separate brigades, each with its own commander. He himself assumed command of the 4th Brigade of the Garibaldi, with some 600 men and a few women partisan fighters. Later, as largely as a result of the success of his brigade in a major battle with the Germans who tried to attack his stronghold, the High Command ordered him to join the 4 brigades together into a single unified fighting force, a division that he was to command. And that's how my father became a division commander in the Voluntary Liberation Corps over some 2,500 troops. This is an artifact from his time as division commander. Never ceases to amaze me. They had stationery up in the mountains, letterhead stationery. That's the translation of the letterhead on this. And he had a typist. This was a message, an order that he sent out to his sub-commanders. It told them that the enemy at their checkpoints now had a new device where the soldiers could alert the neighboring checkpoint just by stepping on a foot switch. And before they attacked the checkpoints, they were to cut the wires, but make sure you don't cause a short circuit. And my father signed the message right here where it says the military commander. That, and it's hard to read, and nobody could read that. It says Wygoda. That's how he signed it. On April 24th, 1945, he got a message that he was to lead his troops down out of the mountains and help with the liberation of Savona the next day. He didn't save that message, but he saved this one. So we have it. This was a follow-up that came on the same day. And you see who it was addressed to. The stamp down on the bottom, it's kind of faded, but this is what it says. It came from the British military mission. And the message asked him to station troops on a certain road and to detonate some mines on that road. And it also asked if they, the liaison officers, could accompany my father when he came down out of the mountains to help with the liberation. So the city of Savona was liberated on April 25th. This picture was taken 1 week later on May Day, during a May Day celebration in the main town square of Savona. And there my father can be seen in the middle, wearing his full partisan uniform. Oops, back up. This little patch on his shirt indicated he was a lieutenant colonel in their army. Now, at this time, he was working for the city of Savona as a police inspector, and he maintained that role until he left Europe. Also, at this time, he was in charge of 200 of his former partisan fighters who were assisting the local police in maintaining law and order. A week later, a regiment of the regular Italian army finally arrived in town, and here my father can be seen in a ceremony with that regiment's commander, a colonel, in which he transferred control of assisting the local police, transferred that from partisan army to regular Italian army. And after that ceremony, he gave a speech from the second floor balcony to an assembled crowd below, and that my father's the one standing behind the microphone there. It was a very stirring and patriotic speech, all in Italian, of course. He brought the speech with him to the United States. And I put part of the translation out there from one little section. It says, "The Italian people have won the battle. The Italian partisans, through their fierce resistance, which left thousands of them dead in the field and as many wounded, have accelerated the death sentence of the power, both material and moral, of the common enemy, and in doing so have spared the blood of the glorious Allied forces." He had a way with words. Soon he began receiving awards and decorations, including this certificate to the Patriot that was presented to him by the combined Italian and British governments. The last sentence translates, "In the reborn Italy, the bearers of this certificate will be proclaimed as patriots who fought for honor and freedom." Over the next year, he received these 4 different ID cards, each for a different purpose. The one in the upper left was his partisan veteran ID card. And if you're close enough, you can see how he signed Wygoda, which was the same way he signed that military order I showed you. These were the first legitimate IDs he had carried in six years. Then in early June 1946, this telegram arrived at the police station in Savona. It asked the person named below, my father, to report to a given address in Milan, Italy, on the 25th, to receive instructions regarding the receipt of an American Declaration for Valor. The last sentence translates, "He is advised to wear his partisan uniform." So my father went, and there he is in the center. Those of you who are close enough may be able to see the Bronze Star medal that's on his shirt there. He was one of 10 former Italian partisans who were selected for this special ceremony to receive that medal that day from United States General Mark Clark. And that event caused him to want to come to the United States. And it also greatly facilitated his receipt of an immigration visa. Here are my parents, Hermann and Ray Wygoda, taken on their wedding day in Chattanooga, Tennessee in 1947, about a year after he came to this country. When they met, my mother was a widow with a 6-year-old daughter named Lois. On the left, that's Lois sitting next to my mother, and in my father's lap, that's my other sister, Sylvia, who was born in 1948. In the other picture, I'm the little baby. I was born in 1951. My father became a United States citizen in 1952 when I was about 5 months old. This is his certificate of naturalization. He was a true patriot. He loved and supported his new country Just to give you an example, every summer he would load us up in his station wagon and drive us all over the country to show us what he called this great nation. We saw the Golden Gate Bridge, we saw Mount Rushmore, we saw the Alamo, we saw the Liberty Bell. We went inside the Empire State Building, inside the Statue of Liberty, inside the Washington Monument, and inside the White House on a tour. With these and many other vacations we took as a family. There he is with his station wagon. He's in front of one of his construction sites. He became a general contractor and land developer. And today there are hundreds of families in Chattanooga who live in houses that he designed, built, and sold himself. Now, this has not just been the story of one resistor who survived, but two. That's Leon Pergol. He survived. He's the man who faked the ID cards. He escaped from that jail after several weeks and ended up walking all the way to Switzerland to gain his freedom. He never could get a visa to come to the United States, but eventually he got one to come to Canada. And I was able to meet him when I was a boy. Okay, this last slide I'm going to show you, a very special one. I took it myself at the Montreal World's Fair in 1967. It's the only picture that exists that has Leon and my father in the same picture. And when this picture was taken, Leon was 54 years old, and my father was 60. My father passed away in 1982. Leon passed away in 1995. And I will conclude by saying that may their memories be a blessing. And I would like to thank the JCC and the Holocaust Museum for making my visit here possible, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. Thank you. Okay. Okay.
Is this on? Yeah, okay. All right. The hands are up already. Start with mine.
With the military background and all, did your father consider going to Israel rather than the U.S.?
He actually, and this is not in the memoir at all, but in the summer of 1946, this is before he received the Bronze Star and all, he was actually going to move to Israel. And he went to, well, Palestine at the time. He went there and he didn't like it. He went back to Italy. So that was it.
Hello, I have two questions. Number one, does the book detail how he explained from the military prison? It does?
Yes.
Okay. And number two, his ability, his mastery of languages, his other skills and so on, and these amazing experiences and things that he led and was in charge of at great risk to his life. Have you or was he ever approached in a movie based on the book or anything?
No, but I wish someone would approach me. But that
you.
never happened.
I had other hands. Anyone else? I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big gift that your father had about the languages.
Yes.
I actually grew up with a father like that who spoke 7 languages. So is that something that you inherited?
It's apparently not genetic. I can speak English and that's it.
Okay.
I don't have that knack. I mean, you said 7. I think he spoke 7 or 8 languages.
Yeah.
You know.
It was incredible. It just always amazed me, and I'm not very good at it. So,
and I just an example of how this stuck with him. I remember once when he was in his 70s, we were at a restaurant somewhere, and at a nearby table, somebody was speaking Italian. He turned around and they got into this conversation in Italian after all those years.
It's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Oh, got another one here.
Very interesting.
I was wondering what you did for a living.
Yes. Before I retired, I was a biology professor in Louisiana, and I was head of my department for 20 years. So I guess the leadership is inherited.
Why Durham, North Carolina?
Grandkids.
Ah.
That's the reason a lot of people,
People here can
Yeah.
attest to that, right?
that's right.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming today. And
you.
thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you to the interns. Thank you to the Holocaust Museum. Really appreciate it.